So this is a look at stamps which the United States issued honoring recently dead presidents. Not all presidents, of course. Every president eventually gets on U.S. stamps, but it often, since we have a policy of not putting living people on, although that policy may have altered somewhat, I'm not sure. But in any case, this topic here is those presidents who died in office and were soon honored on United States postage. Of course, the idea of honoring a recently dead person is commonplace in philately. The most common way of doing it in the West has been a black border. Sometimes it's a new issue with a black border printed on it. At other times, it's a issue that was issued earlier, but it's now overprinted with a black border. The black doesn't typically have any particularly religious significance, but it is culturally so. I don't know. In China, for instance, the typical color for funeral arrangements and so on is white, not black. I've seen photos where people don white capes as they're going to attend a funeral or memorial ceremony in China. But in any case, in the West, a black border is often seen. Sometimes it's just an overprint with or without a black border. Another example was these stamps honoring President von Hindenburg while he was still alive in 1932, and then the memorial issue in 1934, which was overprinted with a black border. The United States, however, has always done it differently. I can't think of any United States stamps that are bordered in black in memorial for any person, either presidential or otherwise. So, how many presidents died in office? Well, quite a few. It makes you really think when you're voting, who is the vice presidential candidate? The odds are pretty strong that that individual might eventually make it to the White House because the incumbent died, or of course, because at a subsequent election, that individual will be voted president. Two presidents died before it was customary to put them on stamps. William Henry Harrison, who reigned, I say, no, who was in office for a grand total of 31 days. And he died, I think, of pneumonia. And he was succeeded by John Tyler of Virginia. Zachary Taylor died in office. He was elected in 1948. He took office in 1949, and he died in 1850. He will not appear on a stamp until 1875, I think it is. He had to wait a quarter of a century. And why he appeared at that time, I do not know. It's a 5-cent stamp. It's blue. And it's of interest in that I believe it's the first time that a United States stamp with a portrait on it has the full frontal view rather than a profile. I believe that's the case. So, yeah, as we were saying, two presidents did not get on stamps immediately. One, because there were no postage stamps at the time, and the other, because the custom had not been established. This is a list of those 6 men who did die as incumbents in the White House and were quickly honored on stamps, on mourning stamps. So I've listed here the year that the president was elected and the month and year that the individual died. If there's an A after the name, it's because the president was assassinated. If there's an N after the name, it's because it is apparently a death caused by natural causes. Uh, there always are conspiracy theories about everything. And so some of these, Warren Harding, for instance, is rumored to have been poisoned. Uh, well, who knows? I'm not a conspiracy type guy, so I don't know. I think it's remarkable how many of these guys were assassinated. But you have to remember that the late 19th century is often referred to as the age of assassination. Political leaders, left and right, were being bumped off all the way up to the beginning of World War II, really, including the Tsar of Russia and so on. And I should point out that for every successful assassination, I hate to use that term, many, many other attempts were made. Even in recent history, attempts were made on Harry Truman, on Ronald Reagan, Jerry Ford. It's just part of the job, I guess. So the first mourning stamp issued in the United States depicted Abraham Lincoln. This stamp came out approximately 1 year after his death in April of '65. I doubt that many people in Old Dixie ran to the post office to buy this thing. And in fact, I don't know the history of it, but you'll see the denomination is 15 cents, making it a very uncommon stamp. 15 cents was the rate to mail a first class letter to France at the time, perhaps to other places too. But we are well before the UPU conventions. And for instance, at the time this came out, as I say, it was 15 cents to mail to France. It was more expensive to mail to Great Britain. I think it was 24 cents or something like that. Each individual country had to negotiate with every other individual country to see what was an acceptable rate. As I say, I kind of speculate deep in the back of my mind that they gave it this 15-cent value so that it really wouldn't be popping up in very frequently in South Carolina and Louisiana and so on. So James Garfield died in when did I have him? 1882, I guess. I forget. Anyway, he gets on a stamp twice simply because they changed the color. Now, this was after the UPU conventions, and the change to blue may be related to that. I'm not sure. He was an interesting guy in his own way. He was a professor, among other things. He was a military man, but he was also a professor of mathematics and very, very smart guy. In fact, he came up with a totally new and unique proof of the Pythagorean theorem. How he got into politics, I don't know. McKinley's situation is very puzzling to me. He was shot in 1901 in Buffalo, and yet he did not get honored on a stamp until 1904, and it was released at another exhibition, this one in St. Louis. It was his portrait. This is the first time he appears on a stamp. It is a memorial type issue. It's in a set honoring the Louisiana Purchase. But of course, that was done a century earlier, and he had absolutely nothing to do with the Louisiana Purchase. Why he is enmeshed in this series of, I think it's 5 stamps, I really do not know. And he was a very, very popular president. This was the age of American imperialism and
Can you read the text above his head there?
Commemorative series of 1901.
And there are his dates, 1843 to 1901. But why they waited, I do not know.
Yeah.
And why they put it in this set. In fact, there had been what I will call a famous Americans series issued between 1901, the year of his death, and 1904. And both Lincoln and Garfield, 2 assassinated presidents, appeared in this set. And yet McKinley didn't. And I repeat, he was an extremely popular man. Yes.
McKinley was assassinated by Leon Czolgosz, who was a young anarchist. The anarchists were deeply into assassinating leaders. They had the idea that somehow they would foment an uprising and revolution by killing off, by killing leaders. They made a practice of it, not only presidents, but also industrial leaders. Henry Clay Frick, he was head of U.S. Steel, I believe, and there was an assassination attempt on him by Alexander Berkman,
Mhm.
another famous anarchist.
And there were the bombs that went off in Wall Street. You can
Right.
still see the scars in the buildings there in the House of Morgan, the corner of Wall and Broad. Back to postage here. Lincoln and Garfield, assassinated presidents, appeared in the interval between McKinley's death and his appearance. It's a mystery to me. The next man to die in office was Warren G. Harding, and he got a stamp very, very quickly, a matter of weeks. The stamp was printed in black, and it's of a design that makes it fit in easily with the rest of the definitive series that will last all through the 1920s, which consists largely of presidents, but not entirely. The higher values are things like the Statue of Liberty, I believe the Lincoln Memorial, and an allegorical representation of Columbia, I guess it is.
Notice the value on that. The bottom of that Scott entry for a Scott
Yes.
613, $40,000. Apparently not known unused. That's the
Ah,
famous Perf 11 McKinley stamp that, people look through hundreds and hundreds of these common stamps in hopes of finding a Perf 11.
speaking of the denomination of the stamp, not the value of it, Harding got the 2 cent. Was the new first class rate, which had dropped from 3 during World War I, back
Mhm.
down to 2. And American stamps value with a face value of 2 cents through the 20s are known as the 2 cent reds because most of them were red. Some of them were bicolor, red and black. They are extremely handsome stamps, by the way. Although they were often criticized, the 20s was the era of 150 years since the Revolutionary War, and they were issuing stamp after stamp about this battle and that battle and so on and so forth. And people were getting a little bit tired of it. This is something I pulled off the internet. This is a very interesting cover. I wouldn't mind having this myself. This has, of course, the 4 2 cent stamps on it. It's on White House stationery, and yet it's mailed from Marion, Ohio, where Harding had grown up. And I believe he was a newspaper editor at the start of his career. Harding will reappear on stamps in 25 and in 30 with a new value, and in one instance, with a new portrait. The next president to die in office was, of course, FDR in 1945, and he gets 4 stamps. Again, no border or anything like that on it. I don't know if it was 4 stamps because he was elected 4 times, or certainly he was a towering figure in the 1940s worldwide. He, along with, I would say, John F. Kennedy, probably appear on more postage from other countries than any other presidents from the 20th century onward. And so I mentioned John F. Kennedy. He was the last one. He died in 63. It took half a year before this came out, and it was printed in a very somber gray. And this is the immediate mourning stamp for JFK. And that wraps up this little stroll down memory lane.